morning, everybody. Welcome to the session today. Over the past 4-5 weeks, right, meeku chala sessions avutunnayi, Vlsi, technical items and some soft skills. Today's session will be a little bit different. So I'm Varma as Konala. I had a long career at Intel, almost 28 years, and for the last 3 years, I was the CEO of a applied AI research center called INAI. That was a public-private initiative between Intel, Government of Telangana, and IIIT. And right now, I'm consulting with a lot of startups. So today, the title of the session is Marketing 101 for Engineers. Right. So if you guys are not familiar with the terminology, generally, in the universities, 101 ante the beginning, right? If you're in a bachelor's course, the first year courses are all called 1 something, second year courses 2 something. So what I want to do today is really talk about some fundamental aspects of marketing that engineers should know. Typically, manam engineers ante we have, we keep mostly to the technical side, and marketing evaro chestunaru, somebody else will do it, and then we really don't get into those aspects. But I'll talk about my experience and what I have learned from my experience and share with you some of those learnings. So the agenda today is I'll spend a little bit on my background, right, so that you know where I'm coming from. Then I'll talk about generally marketing ante manaki, there are some things we should know, right? So I'll talk about some fundamentals that I have learned, right? And then when you deal with customers, right, there are some things that we should know. I'll talk about that. And then we'll switch gear a little bit, right? Then I have something called design thinking. Most of my experience has been in building new organizations, right, building new products. And even right now, I spend a lot of time with startups in the semiconductor and AI domain. So I'll spend a little bit of time on that for people who are interested in that side of things, right? And then we'll summarize, right? So let me start with my background. So I started out as an engineer, like most of you guys are. I got my bachelor's in electronics and communication engineering, went to US, did my master's, and then my dream job at that time, I really was interested in Vlsi, right? I really wanted to be a chip designer, and at that point of time, this was in 96, right? It was a really good time for Vlsi. There were a lot of companies hiring, and I really wanted to get into Intel, and it turned out that Intel was hiring a lot, and I got into Intel, right? And then in Intel, most of the engineers at the time used to work on the PC side, designing all the chips for the PC, and some on the server side. But luckily, I got into what we called a new business development. So right from day one, I always worked on new projects, right? Actually, my first project, some of you might have looked up my profile on LinkedIn, so you'll see the details. I worked on, my first project was CMOS sensor. You'll see all these digital cameras out there, right? At that point, it was all analog cameras, and we designed actually the first CMOS sensor that went into digital cameras. And then similarly, I worked on 3 to 4 different new products, right? But over the 4 years that I was doing all these new projects, we used to design everything, and last vachesariki, when it was supposed to go into production, it used to get cancelled. Right? And then I used to wonder, manam inta kashtabaddamu, right? We did all this work, why is it not getting into the market? Right? So that's when I realized that actually, it doesn't matter how good your product is. Meeru enta manchi product anna cheyachu. Ultimately, it has to have a real customer, and somebody has to pay for it. Right? If there is no paying customer, then it doesn't matter how good your product is, right? So that's where I had my aha moment. You know what? The real decisions are made on the business side. Right? So I wanted to move over to the business side, right? I was also naturally inclined to be on the business side. So I went and got my MBA. So I was working at that time in Arizona, So I went to Arizona State University and got my MBA and switched to the business side. So actually, when I switched out to the business side, manam engineering chestu untamu and we are all into the technical stuff and do all those things. And yes, okay, I got my MBA. MBA lo నేర్పిస్తారు నేర్చుకుంటాం, right? There's a lot of things, accounting, marketing, finance, go to market, all these things. But that's all theoretical to a certain extent, right? Yeah, you do some case studies and things like that. But since then, right, for the past 20 years, I've been in various kinds of marketing roles in various geographies. Not only in US, I dealt mostly with customers in Japan, China, Taiwan, South Korea, UK, all over the place, right, in South America. So I learned a lot of things through that period. Appu naaku anpichindi, right, uppudu whatever I'm learning, I learned it over that period. If I had a course like this before I switched over to marketing, something like, hey, these are the fundamentals you should know, these are some of the skills you should know, that would have been very helpful. So నేను అప్పటి నుంచి I used to wonder, why don't we do something like this for engineers before they get deep into their career, right? So that's what I want to do today, right? I want to go over some of the fundamentals that you should know when you switch over from engineering to marketing. Not really switch over, right? Typically మనము మార్కెటింగ్ అంటే ఏదో మార్కెటింగ్ వాళ్ళు చేస్తారు అనుకుంటున్నాం. But if you're an engineer as part of a big group, as part of a big organization, whatever role you are in, you actually have a customer. Because you went over these various Vlsi design cycles, right? Various design components over the last 4 or 5 sessions, starting with the front end design, back end, layout, validation, testing, various unnai. So you'll be in one of those groups when you get started. So when you're in one of those groups, you're delivering your product to some other group. So that group is your customer, right? So whatever role you're in, actually right from day one, you actually have a customer. Maybe not the end customer who's paying for you, but you actually have a customer. So some of these concepts you should know right from day one. But I'll be talking mostly from an end customer perspective, but it's applicable any time in your career, even from day one. Right? So that's one thing. Then, like I said, most of my experience has been in building new businesses, right? So that's where most of my learnings came from. And for the last 3 years, actually, I led this applied AI research institute called INAI. So this, I want to spend a few minutes talking about it. So this came about around 5 years ago. So I was at Intel in a group called I2R, which stands for Ideas to Reality. So our mandate was to go build new businesses for Intel that Intel is not traditionally in. So I was dealing with a lot of startups, especially in healthcare domain and other domains. So, and AI was becoming a big buzzword. And if you see how AI is evolving all over the world, I'll take US and China as 2 examples to compare against. If you see US, right, most of the AI efforts are led by the big corporations, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, now OpenAI, right? The US government does some stuff, but the private organizations drive most of the effort. And if you see China, it's mostly done by the Chinese government. I'm very familiar with how things are in China. So before I I was in US for a long time. Then I worked for 3 years in China. Then I moved to India. So I'm very familiar with how things work in China. There are a lot of companies, but the Chinese government actually is behind most of the efforts. If you see India, we have a very unique setup and unique opportunity, right? So we have the government doing what the government is doing, and we have the academia doing what they're doing, and the industry is doing what they're doing, and there are all significant efforts on their own. Right? Well, that's the good news where we have an open ecosystem, right? What we wanted to do was bring all these 3 entities, academia, government, and industry, under one umbrella, right? And use that combined effort to actually solve real problems that are impacting the society. So that was the thought behind INAI, and we were talking to various state governments and various academic institutes. And we already had good efforts going on between Intel and IIIT Hyderabad here, and also Intel and the government of Telangana. So all three of us came together and we started this institute called Applied AI Research Institute called INAI. So since I was very much involved in with that concept and getting it started, Intel deputed me to actually build that institute and run it, and that's what I was doing for the past 3 years. And for the past 6 months, I was done with that, and now I'm doing on my own, right, advising startups and looking at the startup scene. Right? So if you see the semiconductor sector, as you might have heard from other speakers over the past 4 or 5 weeks, India is at the beginning of a really, really good phase for semiconductor. I came back from Southern US until 2007. From 2007 to 11, I was in China, and I have seen the semiconductor sector grow in China from that time to where they are today. Right? So a lot of the startups that I worked with in China at that time, now they're big companies. Right? And I came back here in 2011, and I have seen where the state of the industry was. Since then to now, it's a significant change. I never thought I'll see a fab in India in my lifetime, but across the semiconductor sector, things are happening in India. Fab is happening, assembly and test is happening, and design is happening, especially a lot of our startups. Right? So it's really good phase, right? And I'm interacting with a lot of those. Right? So that's my experience. So what I want to do today is essentially, talk about things I have learned on the marketing and the customer interaction side, and present that to you guys. So normally I used to do this in Intel, IIIT, and INAI. I do this with a live audience where I present something and ask questions to the students or the other engineers. ఇక్కడ మనకి live లేదు, but I think there is a number you can call, right? So whenever you want to have any questions or want to make this interactive, please call the number. Right? Okay, so let's get going. So let's start with a basic question, right? Who is a customer? Right? Like I said, customer is not just the end customer. Obviously, there's an end customer, right, who will actually use your product, right? But if you're an engineer in an organization, anybody who you're interacting with and who you have to deliver something is your customer, right? And obviously, at the end of it, it goes to an external customer. Right? So that's what you need to remember, right? It's not only the marketing guys that deal with the customer. Even as an engineer, you always have a customer who you're delivering it to, right? So keep that in mind, right? So that it's not that, hey, what is the relevance of this survey? నేను ఇంజనీరింగ్లో ఉన్నాను, ఏదో చేసుకుంటున్నాను నా పని నేను, why do I need to care about marketing and customer అంటే? Because ultimately everybody has a customer, right? If you don't have a customer, then what are you working for? You can't be working in isolation. ఏదో చేస్తున్నావు అంటే you deliver that to somebody, right? And that guy is a customer, and that guy has some expectations. So you need to understand what his expectations are and how you want to interact with them, how you want to deliver to them. Okay. So then the next question is, okay, you have a customer. Why does the customer buy from you? Right? This may seem like a simple question, and when I first switched over from engineering to marketing, I had నాకు ఒక perception ఉండేది, right? But that perception changed quite a bit as I interact with customers, and it took me almost 3-4 years to realize actually why does a customer buy from you, right? So let's start with maybe great product, right? Everybody who works on a product works on it because they think they're building a good product or great product. So is the customer buying from you because you have some great product? Could be. I mean, it's one of the reasons. Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a good product, the customer won't even talk to you, right? So that could be one reason, right? Great product. By the way, this is the kind of stuff where I do interactively with the audience when I do this thing. But anybody wants to call in, please do. Right? Brand, you have a great brand. Having worked at Intel, this used to be on the top of my mind, right? నేను ఇంటెల్లో పనిచేస్తున్నాను, our product will have Intel brand. customer will buy, right? Not just Intel actually. Any big company has this sort of notion that, hey, I have a great brand, and that's true to a certain extent, but for a customer, brand plays a role, but that's not the only reason, right? We have to take it from our mind pretty fast, right? Otherwise, it sits in our mind, hey, I have a great product, I have a great brand, customer will buy vastadu na daggirkani, raru, right? Price, okay, you have a better price compared to anybody, sure, right? You have to be competitive, right? So that's, you have to do that anyway. Availability, okay, I have an exclusive product that nobody else has. That's sometimes it's true, and customer will have no choice, but that can be the reason why the customer is buying from you. అప్పుడు మీ దగ్గర కొంటాడేమో, మీ దగ్గర ఉంది ఇంకెవరి దగ్గర లేదని, but you won't be able to sustain that, right? Then okay, ఎవరో చెప్పారు కస్టమర్కి, if you're dealing with the procurement guy, his boss tells him, okay, వీళ్ళ దగ్గర కొను అని కొంటాడు. Okay, that's also works to a certain extent, but that can't be the thing. Relationship. There are times when the customer wants to have a strategic relationship with you because that's important for them for various reasons, right? Maybe for future or for PR purposes. So it can be any of these reasons why the customer buys from you, but the most important thing why the customer buys from you is because it trusts you. This might sound simple or obvious to some people, but when you get into that role, right, you don't realize, right, how important this thing is. Because the customer is buying from you, if you see from a human perspective, why is customer buying something from you? They want to do something. Or when I say customer, let's say if you're talking to somebody, it's typically their engineering manager or the procurement guy over there who's buying something from you because it is going into something they are building, right? They want to build a product, and the guy who's heading the effort from the customer side, he wants to advance his career, right? So they want to be successful, and during the product development process, you will run into issues, right? So he will buy only if he trusts that you will resolve all those problems for you. No development process is smooth, right? Whatever you're doing, you'll run into issues, and the customer is buying because he trusts you that you have their back, right? This is very important to remember, right? Idi marchipotu untamu because we get into a lot of these other things, other reasons, but trust is very important, okay? It took me a while to realize this, so the sooner you know, the better it is, so that your actions reflect that. Okay, then let's talk about, I distilled all my learnings into 4 different things. If you are, let's say, you are an engineer for 4 or 5 years and you want to dabble into the marketing side, right? And you want to get into the marketing side. What are the changes you need to make, or what are the things you should be aware of, right? First thing, mindset, right? And I'll talk more about what I mean by that, right? As an engineer, you have a particular mindset. When you switch to marketing, your mindset needs to change. ఇది నాకు ఆల్మోస్ట్ 3-4 years పట్టింది. ఇది ఫస్ట్ నీకు మైండ్ సెట్ చేంజ్ చేసుకోవాలి అని తెలిసాక మైండ్ సెట్ చేంజ్ చేసుకోవాలి, రైట్? దట్స్ నెంబర్ 1. నెంబర్ 2, గ్రే. వాట్ డు ఐ మీన్ బై దట్? వాట్స్ గ్రే? రైట్? ఇంజనీరింగ్లో టిపికల్లీ we deal with black and white. You get a set of requirements and you execute to that. But once you move to marketing, very few things are black and white. Most of the things are in gray, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, right? This is the second thing. Third thing, simplify, right? This is extremely important. I'll talk about this in a little detail, right? The fourth thing, perception, right? Especially for us from India, in kuda nak time pattindi, right? I'll give you specific examples of how I learned all these lessons the hard way. Okay, let's talk about mindset, right? Mindset ante em change chesukovali, right? From quantitative to qualitative. So what do I mean by that? Typically engineering lo we quantify things, right? Okay, you want to build a product. Oka requirements untai and you follow the requirements, I want this feature, I want this, I want this. You follow a set of requirements, right? So you are very clear when you define something, these are in the product, these are not in the product. Very clear, black and white, right? But when you on the engineering side, things don't work like that, right? It's qualitative. I think I want this like this entire. So then you'll have to sort of, translate that into something concrete that the engineer can work on. So that's a first thing. So your mindset needs to change to handle that kind of thinking from a quantitative to qualitative mindset. That's number one. Second thing, from an introvert nature to extrovert, I mean, you can't change your personality, who you are. What I mean by this is, if you want to get into the marketing side of things, you will have to sort of koncham aloచింchali, right? Does that suit my personality, right? Because you can't completely change. You can change a little bit. You can't completely change who you are. Right? Nenu chesinappudu, I did my MBA in 2001. Appudu in US at that time, very few people, very few Indians are on the marketing side. Right? Most of the Indians used to be in the engineering side, as you can imagine. Right? So, I did my MBA, and then along with me, I had like 7 or 8 of my Indian friends who also did my MBA. But of all these people, I was the only one who actually switched to the business side. మిగతా వాళ్ళందరూ వాళ్ళు ఎంబీఏ చేశారు, బట్ దే కంటిన్యూ టు బి ఇన్ ఇంజనీరింగ్ అండ్ టు దిస్ డే దే ఆర్ స్టిల్ ఇన్ ద ఇంజనీరింగ్ సైడ్, రైట్? సో ఇట్ రియలీ డింట్ హెల్ప్ దెమ్, రైట్? వాళ్ళకి ఎంబీఏ కావాలని చేశారు, బట్ నాట్ బికాస్ దే హ్యాడ్ ఎ క్లియర్ ఐడియా ఆఫ్ వాట్ దే వాంటెడ్ టు డూ విత్ దట్ ఎంబీఏ, రైట్? బికాస్ ఐ వాస్ క్లియర్ ఇన్ మై మైండ్, ఐఎమ్ గోయింగ్ టు గెట్ మై ఎంబీఏ బికాస్ ఐ వాంట్ టు స్విచ్ ఓవర్ టు ద బిజినెస్ సైడ్. సో మీరు కూడా ఆలోచించుకోవాలి, రైట్? డూ ఐ want to really get into the business side? Does it suit my personality? Valandaru, they were happy in their engineering side and then comfortable there, right? So that's the second point. Third point, read between the lines. What does this mean? Again, similar to the first point, right? In engineering law, we have, clear conversations. This is what it is, this is what it is. And when somebody talks to you also, you have a clear set of requirements. But when you talk to customers, especially when you cross cultural boundaries, right, with other countries and other languages, they won't clearly tell you what they want. Appudu maniki, that's where you really need to be able to interpret what they're saying, right? I'll talk a little bit more about this also. Okay, that's the mindset part, right? Then next, go to the gray. Handle uncertainty. This is the first thing you need to be able to do when you're switching over to the marketing side, right? Because on the customers are never clear, right? There are some customers who will clearly say, this is what I want. Customer also sort of, first of all, they're defining what they want, right? Koncham molecular clarity undadu. But even then, they will define at a high level, right? I want this, and that has a lot of uncertainties, right? Coming from an engineering background, that was tough to handle for me in the beginning, right? I'm used to, okay, this is the things you need to execute on, I'll go execute on. But here you're talking to the customer, it's not clear, how do you navigate that, right? That's the first thing. Right? Second thing, imprecise requirements, right? Similar to the first one, right? Vallu clear ga chepparu, right? If you see typically how we do in the marketing, you have 2 major documents called market requirements document and product requirements document, right? Typically when you're an engineer, you get a product requirement document and you work on it. But the marketing guy has to put together something called marketing requirement documents, which is at a higher level, and that's not as exact. And typically in engineering, you are not exposed to that side. But now that if you are in the marketing role, you have to do that. So you should be able to handle that, right? Third thing, prioritize. Right? Customer tells you a lot of things, right? Naak idi kavali, naak adi kavali ani, right? Not everything, typically, not everything is important and not everything is required, right? And that's where the engineering team looks to you to say, okay, mee daggara oka 20 requirements unnai, or you have 20 items, not all can be done in the timeline that you want. Tell me what's important. So this is where you really have to prioritize and say, these are the things, right? And that requires a new skill set, right? Because that's not easy. You have to sort of balance between, you have to be the bridge, right? Translate between what the customer wants, what the engineering team can do, and that's a very iterative and delicate exercise, right? So that luckily I had some good customers when I started, and I was able to have really good conversations, but not all customers will give you that much of bandwidth and that much of time to have all these conversations. So that's actually a tough exercise, right? So this is the second thing. Third thing, simplify. This is the most important thing in my opinion, right? Like they say, keep it simple, stupid, right? Typically, when, especially this applies to big companies, when I say I was at Intel, right? We go to a customer and we have our PowerPoint and presentation, and we put a lot of stuff in there, right? Idu na product lo idundi, na product lo idundi, and lot of things. But the customer doesn't care about all those things, right? This is where less is more, right? Typically, 3 things. If you have more than 3 things in a presentation, you won't be, the other person won't be able to remember all those things. So you want to stick to top 3 things, right? That you want your audience to remember, right? This actually, this is a single biggest mistake that a lot of people do, right? They typically think, I'll pack up a lot of the stuff. Even forget an end customer, even in your engineering meetings, right? You have some status update or something like that. You throw a lot of things, right? But okay, you can put things, but ultimately you should be able to say what are the top 3 things you want your audience, your key stakeholder to remember, right? So this is extremely important, right? Simplifying things. And then this is something that it's called a Boyer template. This is something that my boss, when I first moved into marketing, my boss made me go through this thing, and it has been really helpful for me. So I'll just quickly go through this, right? It's called a Boyer template. So whenever you want to do a presentation, start with these things, right? First thing, who's your audience? This sounds very simple, but actually it's very difficult. Typically in a meeting, there are a lot of people in a meeting, but not everybody is your audience, right? You're trying to impress somebody to get a decision. So your presentation needs to be tailored to that person or the set of persons so that you get that decision, right? So be very clear of who is your audience. Meeting lo 10 mandi undachu, right? Who is a decision maker and what do you need to do to impress them to get your decision? Number 1, who is your audience? Second thing, specific action desired, right? What exactly do you want them to do, right? This is very important, right? There are meetings where you just want to inform, or there are other things, and then there are meetings where you want a specific decision to come out of the thing. So you need to be clear what kind of meeting is it, so that the presentation is geared for that, right? Second, a specific action desired. Then for that action, what are the key points? Right? There are lots of things you can put in the presentation, but you want to get that specific action. So put your points only to get that specific action, right? Then fourth one, this is very important. Typically, we don't go through this exercise. Right? This is where you need to put yourself in the customer's shoes and say, what are the objections that they can have, right? So you really need to role play this thing. Nene outside unte, nakem objections untayi, and what can I do to overcome those objections, right? Then at the end of it, again, 3 things, just 3 things to remember. So this simple template, whenever I put together a presentation, I used it and it is very effective, right? It doesn't take a lot of time before you get started to actually go through this exercise, but you need to be disciplined to go through this exercise, right? So that's one thing, right? Then the last thing, perception, right? Typically, as Indians, actually, at least I didn't think this mattered much, right? In my first job, we were a small group. I was a technical marketing engineer, right? So I used to do a lot of talking in front of the customer, right? Because our first customer was Japanese customer, and if you know Japanese customers, they ask lots of questions, right? So I used to do a lot of talking, right? So, and there used to be 3-4 other people, but there was a product marketing guy, other things. But I used to talk a lot, right? And there, right, I didn't think visual perception matters. So I used to wear, my regular clothes, but the rest of them used to wear a suit. Manaki suit anta alvatledu, so I didn't bother. So we had like 4-5 meetings, and where I noticed in those meetings, నేను మాట్లాడుతున్నాను, but those guys used to get more, I don't know what's the word, prominence, right? Just because they were wearing a suit. And I used to ignore, I'm the main guy, వాళ్ళందరూ ఆన్సర్లు చెప్పేది నేను మాట్లాడుతున్నాను. And then after that, what I said, I'll also change, and I started wearing a suit, and the response was completely different. I was the same guy, right? But I was just wearing a suit. So these things matter. Manamant aloచింcham, especially coming from a background here, we don't think about these things. At least, I didn't when I was in that role. So these things matter, and we need to be cognizant of this, right? And dress appropriately. And as per, in Japan, everybody wears a suit, right? So I had to wear one ultimately. In US, maybe not so much. So you need to be cognizant of, local customs and do appropriately, right? So these are the, if I have to summarize, I'll summarize later. Then let me go to customer 101, right? So far we talked about, if you're changing from the engineering to marketing side, right? 4 things. Interacting with customers and meeting with customers, right? Here again, I have 4 things that I want to talk about, right? I put them into 4 different buckets. First one is listening, right? When I say customer 101, interacting with customers, right? What are the important things when interaction with customers? Listening, understanding, absorbing, and finally action. Right? So I'll talk about each one of these things. First one, listening. Listening without prejudice, this is actually very tough. మీరు కొంచెం ఆలోచించండి, నాట్ జస్ట్ ఇన్ టర్మ్స్ ఆఫ్ కస్టమర్, ఇన్ జనరల్ వీ థింక్ వీఆర్ లిస్నింగ్ టు సంబడి, రైట్? కానీ వీ హ్యావ్ సంథింగ్ ఎల్స్ గోయింగ్ ఇన్ అవర్ మైండ్, ఆర్ వీ ఆల్రెడీ హ్యావ్ సమ్ అదర్ ఒపీనియన్ ఆన్ దట్ పర్సన్, రైట్? సో అంతా విన్నాం మనం, రైట్? సో లిసనింగ్ టు ఏ కస్టమర్ completely without any prejudice takes time. It's not easy, right? So we actually have to practice, right? Not because we have prejudice, but generally when we go to customer meetings, what we want to do is we want to talk, and I see this very often, right? And a lot of people never learn this, right? Because why are you going to a customer meeting first of all? Because you want to listen to their problems and their requirements. No matlatani kaadu, right? Whatever your product is, actually you don't have to explain, right? If the customer has many other ways to get the information. You can give it to him in paper, you can write an email. You don't have to go make a presentation. But a lot of times what we do is we go to a customer meeting, we actually start talking, we present and all that. So my rule of thumb, if I go to a customer meeting, first took 5 minutes, maybe 10% at the most, I talk. After that, I really want the customer to listen, right? And the kind of customers I like best are the ones who talk a lot. Okkasari mana matladi odileste chalu ani matladtaru, because you get to know what his problem is, you get to know what his requirements are, and in the course of that, he'll tell you a lot about your competition that you will not know otherwise, right? So it's very important that you actually listen to the customer, as in let them speak. This is lot, this sounds simple, but మీరు ఇప్పుడు మీటింగ్స్ అటెండ్ అయితే చూడండి, ఎవరు ఎక్కువ మాట్లాడుతున్నారు, ఎవరు తక్కువ మాట్లాడుతున్నారు, రైట్? ఏ గుడ్ మార్కెటింగ్ గై టాక్స్ వెరీ లెస్ అండ్ లెట్స్ ఎ కస్టమర్ స్పీక్. టేక్ నోట్స్. అగైన్ వెరీ ఇంపార్టెంట్. మనం అనుకుంటాం అన్నీ మనకి గుర్తుంటాయి, తర్వాత రాసుకుందాం అనుకుంటాం, బట్ లాట్ ఆఫ్ టైమ్స్ it's important you take notes, because you don't remember everything, and you might forget critical points, right? So even if it's small notes, take notes so that you have it all, right? Manam lazy ga untam dintlo, right? So that need to be a little bit be disciplined, right, to do this, right? So 3 things, right? So listen without prejudice, let the customer talk and take notes. Okay, now you listen to the customer, right? Do you really understand the customer, right? Again, right, if you think listening is tough, understanding is even tougher. And going across cultures, it's even more difficult, right? I'll take one example, right? I worked a lot in China, right? And it used to be a mix of Chinese and some English, right? And memo naluguru aidu unde vallam team lo, right? When we came out, it's amazing. It's almost like the elephant and the 5 men, right? Everybody had a different understanding. We're all in the same meeting, right? Totally different understanding, right? So it's amazing how you think, this is what the customer said, ankuntamu, but it's not. And especially when it's across different cultures, right? And these were actually knowing the language helps a lot, right? So when I was in China, I actually took Chinese, so I can speak some Chinese. So when the Chinese person is actually speaking English, what he's doing is he's actually first thinking in Chinese and translating that into English, right? So even though, right, his English is not exactly the same as our English, it's broken English, I knew what he meant, right? Because he was thinking in Chinese and translating. But other people with me in my team who didn't know Chinese totally took a different meaning, right? So 5 people, 5 different things. So I think we're getting a phone call. So let's take one call. Yeah. Hello. I think we have a caller. Hello.
My name is Shravani. I'm calling from Hyderabad, sir.
Hi, Shravani.
Hi, sir. I have one question, sir.
Yeah.
So what is the role of engineers in marketing in the VLSI field, sir?
So two things, Shravani. First of all, ఇప్పుడు VLSI ఫీల్డ్లో నేను చెప్పినట్టు ఈవెన్ ఫర్గెట్ ద ఎండ్ కస్టమర్, రైట్? ఇప్పుడు మీ ఇంజనీరింగ్ టీంలోనే మీరు అట్లీస్ట్ దెర్ ఆర్ 5 to 6 different functions, right? I mean, there is the front end, there is the validation, there is the testing, there is a back end, right? So you will be in one of those teams, and you have you're delivering your things to the other team. So you have an internal customer first of all that you need to deal with, right? So daniki you need to have a clear understanding, right? What are they expecting and what do I need to, right? Our internal team lone there might be multiple people who are there and you interact with multiple people, but you need to understand who is the key person that will take my delivery, right? If you are working on some module, where a team ki istunna, right? Adokati, that's one thing. But going beyond that, it will really help you if you understand the end customer, right? మీరు ఒక చిప్ చేస్తున్నారు అనుకోండి, that chip goes into some other product with some customer, right? If you understand the requirements from the customer, how he is actually deriving his requirements, you will have a much better idea, because when you are designing something, Shravani, it's never simple in the sense, okay, this is exactly, because you have to make choices, right? I'm trying to do this, but it's not working out. There are these 4 different options. I have to choose one option. అలా చేస్తున్నప్పుడు నీకు ఎండ్ రిక్వైర్మెంట్ తెలిసిందనుకో, దెన్ యూ కెన్ మేక్ ఏ మచ్ బెటర్ ఇన్ఫార్మ్ చాయిస్, రైట్? అండ్ ఎట్ టైమ్స్ మార్కెటింగ్ వాళ్ళు రిక్వైర్మెంట్స్ తీసుకొచ్చి ఇచ్చినప్పుడు నీకు దిస్ ఇస్ సెట్ ఆఫ్ అజంప్షన్స్, రైట్? బట్ ఇఫ్ యూ నో వాట్ దోస్ అజంప్షన్స్ ఆర్, you can make a much better informed choice and you can go tell them, hey, మీరు ఈ రిక్వైర్మెంట్ ఇచ్చారు, I'm trying to do this, it's not working out, we can do this, something else, you go talk to the customer and come back. So that way it will help you a lot, right? Does that help, Shravani? Okay, then understanding, right? Sync with the other participant. And again, I said past cultural nuances, right? I spent a lot of time dealing with South American, of course, US customers, South American customers, Japanese customers, Korean customers, Taiwanese customers, and Chinese customers. So each one of them has a different, right, a different cultural understanding, right, that you need to understand. Okay, then after you understand, then you need to absorb. What does that mean? Absorbing all this stuff, right? Document the meeting minutes, right? So this is important because now if there is typically మీరు ఒక్కళ్ళే వెళ్ళరు మీటింగ్కి, రైట్? యూ ఆర్ పార్ట్ ఆఫ్ ఎ మార్కెటింగ్ టీమ్ అండ్ యూ 3 or 4 of you go, right? And everybody has different little bit different understanding, right? Get it all together and put it in paper, right? It's important. And this one must have, nice to have, right? So if you don't remember anything else from this particular thing, remember this: must have, nice to have. What does that mean? Whenever the customer comes to you, he'll give you a bunch of requirements, right? Dantlo the customer always will have must have, nice to have. Must have is he has to have that in his product. Nice to have is really nice to have, but he can live without that, right? And this is very important for your team, because ultimately the customer will actually only pay for must have. You can get away with not having to do the nice to have, but you can't say that upfront to the customer, right? Nenu ive chestanu ive cheyanu, right? Takes time, right? We need to understand what they are, right? And also it's important for your team, right? Because the customer will always give you more than what you can handle, and your engineering team will say, hey, I can't do all this. How do you draw the line, right? So you really need to understand what is important for the customer and what is not, right? What are the must have items, what are the nice to have items, right? Then based on that, you need to have a crisp action items. Okay, ivi chestamu, ivi cheyanu, right? These are the things, let's follow up, right? So after all this, you have to follow up, right? This చాలా మంది ఇక్కడే this is where you lose the trust with the customer, right? Because when there are some tough action items that you don't have an answer to, people tend to delay and say, hey, నాకు దీనికి ఆన్సర్ తెలియదు, లేకపోతే దీనికి నో చెప్పాలి అని చెప్పి they don't answer. But it doesn't matter. You can say no to customer. Especially for us Indians, it's tough to say no. You have to learn this, right? If you can't say no, it's really tough for you to sort of prioritize and get to a point, right? So this is very important, where you actually get back to the customer as soon as possible, right? Because ultimately, if there is no trust, then there is no sale. So I'll give you one example on getting back to customer, right? So these are the 4 things. Maybe I'll give you 3 different case studies, right? Typically, again, I do this interactively. And what do you think happened at the end of this? So if you guys want to call and answer, maybe I'll give a little bit of pause. You can answer. So let's take the first case study, right? So my first customer was a Japanese customer, right? And if you know Japanese customers, it's they get in a lot of details, right? It's a very laborious process to get a design win with a Japanese customer. So I had almost 15 meetings over 1 year, right? In spite of all that, like after 1 year, we had one meeting where I was not there. My sales guy went to their office and they're like, we've been asking you these questions for a long time and you're not answering these important questions. We just don't have time, right? We're being nice to you. They locked him in the room and gave him a phone and said, you talk to your headquarters. So I was in the headquarters, I own the product. It's like, you answer all these questions, appudu varaku nenu intiki vellaniyamani, right? So however long it takes, right? So it was a pretty bad situation. The guy was literally locked in the room, right? This is after spending 1 year with the customer, right? So what do you think happened? Did the customer walk away? Did we win the customer, right? If anybody wants to call and ask, right, and answer, I'll have 2 more cases. I'll go through all the 3 cases, then I'll give you the answers, right? So this is the first one, right? The Japanese customer. Second one, Taiwanese customer, right? Again, this is one of my first design wins, where we actually shipped 1 million units in Taiwan. And typically, you deal with the engineering manager. You're the marketing and other customer side. He's engineering manager who's talking to you, right? But in this case, I used to have their, of course, engineering manager and their CTO and their VP of business development. వీళ్ళ ముగ్గురు అటెండ్ అయ్యేవాళ్ళు, రైట్? సో అగైన్ I had to go back to my basics. Man, these are 3 big people on the customer side. Who is actually the decision maker? And how do I make sure that whatever I'm presenting and my interactions, right, are tuned to that person, right? I can't satisfy all 3 guys because all 3 guys have different requirements. CTO comes with a set of requirements, the VP of engineering comes with a set of requirements, and the VP of business development comes with a set of requirements. I can't satisfy all 3 of them. So who is my actual customer? Who is the actual audience that I need to cater to, right? So that was a tricky situation. And by the way, this is not atypical. You'll see that with a lot of customers. Right? So this is the second one. Right? Third one, like I said, I was in China for 4 years, and then there was a lot of customer interactions. Akkada chala case studies unnai. I'll put one in front of you. Right? This is a very important meeting with one customer. So there actually I was in charge of designing chips that went into digital TV. So this is one of the big digital TV vendors. So their VP came. It was a 1-hour meeting, and then I was ready with all my presentation and everything, saying that hey, let's close this deal. So a 1-hour meeting lo, first of all, I didn't get a chance to present at all. And then tarvata oka 50 minutes he talked mostly about his family, his son wants to go to US university. So a lot of that conversations. Last 5-10 minutes lo, like, okay, let's talk about your product and this stuff, right? So was that a good meeting? Did we get the design win, right? So 3 different case studies, right? If anybody wants to call in and answer these questions, you can. Otherwise, maybe I'll answer them, right? Before I go to my next topic. So I want to pivot a little bit to the design thinking process, and if you want to build a product, how you want to go about it. Okay, then I'll answer these questions. Then if anybody wants to call in and give their opinion, then do that too, right? So let me go to the first one, Japanese customer. We actually got the design win and he went into production. But this is how things will be, right? I thought I had a really good relationship with this customer, but it doesn't matter, right? By the way it works in Japan, you work the whole day and then evening you go out for drinks and karaoke, right? So I was really good with these customers, but it doesn't really matter. You have fun, but business is business. I think somebody called in. Let's see. Hello.
Hello, sir. Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Sir, I have one doubt, sir.
Cheppamma.
How to handle conflicting feedback from different users, sir?
A good question, right? So 2 things, right? And this is very typical, right? Typically when you're developing a product, right? Over the course of my career, I have developed at least 4 or 5 products, right? And then typically what you do is you talk to multiple customers. There might be one lead customer, right? But you talk to multiple customers, and there is bound to be some conflicting requirements, right? Andarki same requirements undavu, right? Then I essentially used to have 2 criteria, right? First thing, right, is వాళ్ళని నిజంగా అడగాలి మీరు, right? This is where if you are in the marketing role or if you're in engineering role, you can ask your marketing guy to do the same thing. Again, this must have, nice to have, right? Is it really a must have requirement, right? And what does must have mean? Must have means the customer is willing to pay the money. Ultimately, it all boils down to money, right? If the requirement is real, the customer will pay for it, right? If it's not, then then it's not. As simple as that, right? Number 1. Number 2, so you can have the same question, right? If you have conflicting requirements from 2 customers, right? Iddani adigochu, right? Is it really that important? Can your product live without this thing? Number 1, right? Number 2, then judge if both are willing to pay money, right? Okay, both of them say it's a must have requirement. What do you do then? Then you see the volumes, right? Ultimately, right, what are you doing this for? To make as much money from your product as possible, right? Then you look at the volumes and see దీంట్లో అయితే ఎన్ని వాల్యూమ్స్ ఉంటాయి. when I say volumes, how many units you can sell, right? If ఈ కస్టమర్ అకౌంట్ ఉంటే ఎన్ని యూనిట్స్ ఉంటాయి, right? Then it becomes a sort of a numbers game, right? Otherwise, so 2 criteria. First, really see if it's a real requirement. If both of them say it's real, then look at the volumes. Between those 2 criteria, you should be able to decide. And by the way, this is very common you will always get conflicting requirement from customers, right? So it's a very good question. Thank you. Okay, then let's close up on these case studies, right? So the Japanese customer, did he walk away? No, we actually got the design win and went into production, but we had to work a lot, right? That's one. Second one, so the three of them, right? Again, who is the decision maker? It might look obvious if you look at it back, but it was not easy, right? But if you have these three people, engineering, CTO and business development, generally the business development guy is the decision maker, because ultimately he is the one on the customer side deciding what to sell, right? The engineering manager can say, hey, I want to go this way, but if their business guy cannot sell the product, it doesn't matter, right? So I used to work very closely with their business development guy, right, and ultimately made decisions along with him on what should finally go into their product, right? And typically that's the case, right? So remember that, right? Again, right, this is the aha moment I had after 4 years of doing all engineering. I'm not saying all of you should switch over to marketing side, but you should keep that in mind. Ultimately all the engineering is to actually sell a product, right? It has to make business sense, right? The product has to make money, right? Third one, this one. So this again, this particular one, so e meeting ayipayaka, typically when you're, I had my local sales guys with me, right? So I asked my sales guy, మనం ఏదో ఇంత ప్రిపేర్ అయ్యి వచ్చేసాము, we were all like, ready to present our case and all that stuff. అసలు మనం ప్రెజెంటేషనే చేయలేదు ఫస్ట్ ఆఫ్ ఆల్. తర్వాత he didn't even talk about our stuff, 50 minutes ఇవన్నీ వేరే మాట్లాడామని, right? That's where it's a matter of trust again, right? If the customer actually already did his homework, so he was actually ready to sign up, right? And he talked about his personal stuff, his family and all that stuff, because he trusts us and he decided that he will sign up with us, right? So that was a good learning from me. If he doesn't trust us, the meeting would have gone a completely different way. Chala questions adigevallu, excuse cheppevallu, ee excuse cheppevallu. He already made up his mind, right? He spent all these 5 minutes talking about his family and all the personal matters because he wants to build a relationship with us and trust us, right? So that was a good learning for me, right? నేను అనుకున్నాను ఈ మీటింగ్ తర్వాత we didn't accomplish, we failed any, but it is a completely opposite result, right? So again, cultural thing, right? So 3 different customers, 3 different experiences. Okay, then let me get to design thinking and product marketing. What does this mean, right? So typically if you are on the engineering side and want to move to the business side, the normal pattern is you become a technical marketing engineer, right? So that you have both your technology and a little bit of marketing. Then you do what calls product marketing, where you really get into defining the product, right? So when you get into that kind of role, a lot of people now, right, want to do their own startups and do their own products, right? So this, I have been doing this for almost 15 years now, right? I came back to India in 2011. And I was part of a group called I2R, Ideas to Reality, where we were incubating a lot of new products for Intel. So I've been doing this for a while now, so I want to spend maybe 10-15 minutes going through a thinking process of what it takes to actually, right, go through that cycle. So I used to do this session, Intel ki when new engineers come, they had a one day new session, new employee orientation. Dantlo I used to take a 1-hour module called innovation and new product development. So the way we used to do it, employees andarni oka groups king chesevalamu, 4 to 5 groups, and they have to answer these 5 questions that you see here, right? They have to pick a problem statement first. What is the problem you want to solve? And who is your end customer for that thing, and what exactly is your product, right? Is it hardware, is it software, is it service, or some combination of these 3 things, right? and what is your differentiator, right? How are you going to differentiate your product compared to what outside in the market, and what is the revenue model, right? So I used to give them 20 minutes and they brainstorm and then they answer these 5 questions. Right? What do you think is the toughest question to answer among these 5? Right? You would think it's actually maybe some of the bottom ones, right? I'll tell you, right? The bottom 2 ones, everybody has some sort of answer, right? మీరు ఎలా డిఫరెంట్ చేస్తారు మీ ప్రోడక్ట్ని, మీ రెవెన్యూ మోడల్ ఏంటి, దే హ్యావ్ సమ్ సార్ట్ ఆఫ్ ఆన్సర్. సో దోస్ 2 ఆర్ నాట్ టఫ్ వన్స్. Actually, the top 3 are the toughest questions for people to answer. Right? And the first one is actually the most difficult. You think that's actually the easier one, right? What is exactly the problem you're solving? Right? Typically, as engineers, manaki edo oka idea vastundi. Hey, I have this solution. I have come up with a better way. I have come up with a better product. Then you go and say, okay, naaki solution undi. What can I solve with this solution? Right? Generally, that's how engineers go about things. Right? So actually, having a very clear idea of what is the problem you're solving, right, is not as easy as you think. Right? These were actually most of the people used to struggle to articulate what is the problem you're solving. Right? So let's say adi chesaru anukondi, right? Then the next thing is, what is the product you're building, right? So I think there is a caller. So let's take the call. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello. Cheppamma.
Sir, good morning, sir.
Morning.
నా పేరు వివేక్ సార్, నేను నిర్మల్ నుంచి కాల్ చేస్తున్నాను.
చెప్పు వివేక్.
సార్, ఇది చిన్న డౌట్ సార్. ఇది వాట్ ఈస్ డిఫరెంట్ కార్పొరేట్ మార్కెటింగ్ అండ్ కంప్యూటర్ మార్కెటింగ్ సార్? ఇద్దరు వేరే
కార్పొరేట్ మార్కెటింగ్ అండ్
కంప్యూటర్ మార్కెటింగ్.
సెకండ్ ఇదేంటి?
కంపెనీ మార్కెటింగ్ సార్.
యాక్చువల్లీ సో నేను ఐ హ్యాడ్ 3-4 slides on various జనరలీ మార్కెటింగ్ అంటే మనం మార్కెటింగ్ అనుకుంటాము, రైట్? మార్కెటింగ్లో there are, I can at least say 15 different roles, right? So I have actually a few foils, Vivek. నేను ఇది అయిపోయాక నేను అవి కూడా చూపిస్తాను ఒకసారి. then I'll explain the different marketing roles also, right? Yeah, నేను చెప్తాను వివేక్, right? Let me finish this module, then I'll talk about that, right? Okay, so to this, right, who is your end customer and what is your product? Again, these 3 are actually the tough ones, right? So ఒకసారి మీరు ఆలోచించండి, right? If you have any ideas, right, these 5 questions, right, how would you answer those things, right? So how would you go about the process of actually building something? Let's say you have an idea, right? And typical design thinking process, right? The first one is the pain point. Like I said, crisply articulating what the problem is not easy, right? You really have to go immerse yourself in with the actual end user who will actually use your product. Let's say you have an idea of developing some product. Meer office lo kuchini, you can't just say this is the problem that unless you actually go and immerse yourself, right, with what that end user is doing, right? It's not really easy, right? And then you really have to listen, and again, like I said, the must have, nice have, real problem enti, right? Getting to the real pain point is not that easy, right? That's the first thing, right? And the second thing is solution requirement. Again, here you need to think about actually what your product is, right? Lot of times, there are 3 different areas, right? It can be hardware product, a software product, or a service, right? Or it can be a combination of these things. And people sort of mix up those things and are not clear on what exactly is the product, right? Because the product development cycle is completely different based on what it is. If it's actually hardware that you want to sell, you need to think about form factor, the user experience, and a lot of things, right? If it's a service, it's a totally different thing. It's software, then maybe not the form factor, but at least UI, UX, right? So you need to be clear, right, on what exactly is your solution, right? Then the product spec, right? Again, this is where the marketing role comes from, where you need to translate the market requirement, right? You talk to customer, you do all this exercise, you have a set of market requirements. You need to translate that into product requirements for the actual engineers who will work on this thing, right? That's where you need to have priority and trade-off between various things, right? So this is sort of the front end of the cycle where you have identify a clear pain point and then formulate a high level solution and turn it into a product spec that the engineers can use, right? Then gets to the development side, right, where you actually go through the prototyping and iterative process. So here I want to talk about a bit about how the development paradigm has changed from what it used to be, say, when I was in college, where things are now, right? So when at that time, right, we used to sort of maybe I'll take a software as an example, right? We used to learn C, C++, Fortran, things like that, where you start from a simple hello world example and come up with some algorithm or something and then implement it and you get an output, right? That's how it used to be. But with the advent of AI and all these things, now it's completely different, right? Where now you have tons of data and then some model is developed by some company, you throw at it and then you get some solution out of it, right? So where it has come to the point where people are just doing prompt engineering, right? So all this will sort out, right, where your nature of job will change. But the point I want to make is today the development is very abstracted from the lower level stuff, right? Earlier we used to operate at a lower level where we actually understand the requirements, right? If you take Vlsi as an example, right, say 30-40 years ago, people used to design at the gate level, right, transistor level, gate level, right? We used to do logic design and put AND gates and NAND gates and NOT gates and all that stuff. From there to where things are now, and they're changing even further, where you just put some things in a tool and the tool is doing everything, where you don't really have the knowledge or understanding of what all is happening down there, right? So that's okay, in the sense you want to learn some tools and you want to get into a company and work, and that's all fine, but you need to have that's abstracting you. At some point you have to know at least a deep knowledge of at least one domain, so that you're good at one domain, right? So that's the Vlsi stuff. But in general, right, in the development process, right, there are a lot of tools available now, right, and you go through this process, and I put that AI down there in the foil, because now there are so many tools in all these 4 areas that can help you iterate a lot faster, right? And there is this phrase called eat your own dog food. What that means is during this process you really want to have somebody who's not in your development cycle to really test the product, right? So that that person can be a proxy for the end customer, right? They'll test your product like an end customer, right? Typically in your team you have the validation, design and testing folks, but you're all immersed in the product development, so you want to have somebody else outside to actually test it, right? So that's the phrase eat your own dog food, right? So this is the entire design thinking process. So if I have to, and the way things are today, I want to talk about a few more things, because AI is so prevalent now in all the phases. You have tools that you're using, but few things to keep in mind, right? We don't talk about it much now, but this fairness, accountability and transparency, FAT, this will become a much bigger issue down the line, because a lot of the models that are being built, they are they're biased, and also especially in the intellectual property on the front end, right? I mean, if you see the large language models today, there's a lot of information they're all like learning from, but then all that content creators who created that content, they are not getting paid. So this will become a bigger issue down the line, right? And also open source, right? Whenever you use open source, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because there is no such thing as free thing, right? If you are using a product for free, then whatever you're entering into the thing, it's learning from that, right? So somebody has to pay at some point, right? All this, OpenAI and all that, they're doing it right now, but nothing can be free, right? They might give it to you for free today because they want to learn from whatever you're inputting into the model, right? So the free model doesn't work for too long, right? You can start your thing as a free thing. At some point, you have to make money, right? So keep that in mind, right? That there's no such thing as free thing, right? So key takeaways from my design thinking thing, right? This pain point, right? This is very important where you have to do it, right? There is no tool that can help you, right? And you have to be clear on what is the problem you're solving, right? And then you formulate a solution, right? And after that, the development process and testing and iteration process, AI tools can help. But again, there is no free lunch, right? Any free tool you use, you're putting all your data into that free tool, and the tool is learning from you, right? So it's very tough to protect your intellectual property whenever you use a free tool. You got to remember that. Okay, that's mostly on the design thinking, right? I think we have a call. Let's take that call. Hello.
What is the role of a software employee in marketing for self and the company growth?
Software employee aina, hardware employee aina, I'll say the same thing, Amma, right? It doesn't matter whether you're doing hardware, software, or any of it, right? Two things, right? First thing, like I said, there is an internal customer, right? Whatever you're developing, you're delivering it to some other team, and that team ultimately gives it to the customer, right? So first of all, you need to, so there is that dynamic going on. There is an internal customer, you need to understand that part, right? And make sure that you're actually delivering to their expectations. But like I said, indaku mundu adigaru Vlsi ki marketing ki ani. I'll have the same answer. If you know the end customer requirements, if you have insights into your end customer requirements, right, that will help you make better decisions in your development process, right? Because nothing is linear, right? Development process eppudu linear ga undadu. Step 1, step 2, step 3 undadu. Meeru develop chestunnappudu you run into issues and you'll have to make choices, right? Okay, దీని ఇలా చేయొచ్చు, there are 4 options, and if you understand the end customer requirements, right, then you can suggest, right, you can make better decisions, and you can suggest options also. Hey, I have this requirement, kani idi avvatledu, I don't think that's realistic, maybe we'll go this way. Then you can also give feedback to the customer, because marketing guys may not be making the right decisions all the time, saying that customer requirements ichadu, igo neeku istunanu ani. As an engineer, not all of them might be feasible to implement. That way, if you understand those requirements better, then you can make better decisions. Let's see. Then I think I have a few things. Okay, I'll just summarize these things on the marketing and customer side, right? Then I think there is one question on various marketing roles, right? So I'll get to that. So I was not planning to cover that, but I have a few foils on that, right? So on the marketing side, guys, first thing, if you really want to switch over to the marketing side, right, then those are the 4 things I mentioned, right? So first of all, it requires a mindset change. So you need to be cognizant of that, right? Engineering mindset ఒక రకంగా పనిచేస్తుంది, మార్కెటింగ్కి వెళ్ళాలంటే కొంచెం మార్చుకోవాలి మనం. ఫస్ట్ అది తెలియాలి మనకి, ఆల్ దిస్ హ్యాండ్లింగ్ దిస్ అన్సర్టనిటీ, రైట్? And then whenever you're presenting, you really need to simplify things. Especially being engineers, we always throw data, right? మనల్ని ఏమన్నా క్వశ్చన్ అడిగినా we are generally data centric, right? ఇదిగో ఆ పారామీటర్, ఈ పారామీటర్, or this metric, that metric. But generally, right, do not put more than 3 things in a presentation, right? మీరు ఒక 10 పెడితే అందరికీ ఏం గుర్తుండదు. Then your message is lost, right? Stick to the top 3, right? Then in terms of customers, right, customers దగ్గరికి వెళ్ళినప్పుడు, right, if you are generally, right, as engineers, you're also taken to some meetings. Your marketing guy will pull you and say, hey, the customer wants to have a technical discussion, can you come, right? There also, your role should be to understand more of what the customer wants, not explain your product. That's, customer can do anyway, right? So ask probing questions and let the customer answer. You want to understand the reasons behind why the customer has those requirements, right? That's the most important thing you want to do, right? Then act at the end of it. Avanni vinaka, right? It's okay to say no to a customer, right? This is the toughest thing to do for a lot of generally, and for Indians, for us it's even more tough. Manam no ant easy ga cheppamu, right? It's better to say no than to not respond to a customer. So do that, right? So when in cheppe meeku ivanni, it might not be as apparent to you, right? I mean, these are all my learnings over 25 years, right? Because you have not started your careers yet, it might not be that apparent to you, but remember these things, and when you come into that position, right, where you have to make these choices, right, it will be easier for you because you heard from somebody who has gone through this. I wish when I was starting my career, somebody told me all these things. Nobody did, so I had to learn this the hard way, right? So that's the reason I'm going through all this, so that keep that in the back of your mind, and then it's easier for you to transition into this thing. So I'll take my own advice and I'll summarize the top 3 takeaways, right? In general, keep it simple. Less is more, right? Don't drown the audience in data and stuff like that, right? Trust is central to customer relationship. This might sound obvious, or this might sound a simple thing, but always keep this in mind when you're dealing with your customers, whether external customers or internal customers. Once you lose trust, it's very difficult to get it back, right? The customer is buying something from you only because they trust you, right? And the third thing, like I said, my requirements gurinchi mugunalu call chesaru. A requirement is real only if the customer is willing to pay for it, right? మీ కస్టమర్ నాకు ఇది కావాలి అది కావాలని చెప్పొచ్చు, 10 విషయాలు చెప్పొచ్చు, but what is he willing to pay for it? If he's not willing to pay for it, then it's not a real requirement. You can take it off the list, right? Okay, I have a fun exercise. Again, I do this interactively. I'll get to that exercise, but I have a few foils. Let me about the various marketing roles. So let me jump to that. Full screen cheyandi. I'll just go to that. Yeah, so there is a caller about marketing roles. So let's go to the PowerPoint, right? Actually, you would think, before I moved, marketing is just 1 or 2 marketing guys, but depending on the where you're in the organization, there are various different marketing roles. So I'll just spend 5 minutes going through that, so that at least you know the terms, and when you hear it, what they do, right? So let's start with the corporate marketing group, right? If there's a big organization at the very headquarters level, there's a corporate marketing group, right? Dantlo various roles untai. First one is brand management. If you're a big company, there is a dedicated team which manages the brand, right? That's a big job. And for big companies, brand matters a lot. The brand value is a lot. So there's a dedicated team for that, right? Typically, you don't have engineering people in that side, right? People come from a different background into that. Ellochu, kani generally undaru dantlo. Public relations and marketing communications. This is a PR team, right, which manages all the outbound communication, right, press releases and all those things. And there is analyst relations, and typically when there's big companies, there are a lot of analysts who cover your company, right? This is financial analyst, market analyst and all that, right? This is the team which manages those guys. Event management, you do a lot of events, conferences and all these things, right? There's a team specifically for that. Co-marketing is generally a lot of partners, right? If you take Intel as an example, we had this co-marketing thing called Intel Inside, right, where we used to do that collaboratively with a lot of these PC vendors, Asus, Lenovo and all these things. So that is a big co-marketing group managing all that, right, at the corporate level. Right. Let's get to the division marketing, right? You're part of a group or group marketing, right? And the group and the division typically owns a product, right? There are, if you're in VLSI, let's say, you're doing a networking chip or or a PC chip, right, or some other chip. So typically there is a product line that's owned by a division. Dantlo you have the technical marketing guy. So this typically for engineers, this is the first role they get into, because you have a technical background. You get into the marketing side of things, where you handle a lot of the technical matters, right, for the product, right, writing the specs for the product, answering technical questions from the customer and all that, right? That's the technical marketing. Then product marketing. Product marketing is where you so that's the role I took. I started out as a technical marketing guy, then moved into product marketing, where you actually manage the product. What does that mean? It means definition of the product, right? You design thinking, I talked about this, about defining the product. This is where you talk to a lot of customers, and a couple of callers had questions of conflicting requirements, how do you prioritize the requirements, all these things, pricing the product, all these things you do as a product marketing engineer. You define the product, right? Then there is ecosystem partners, and typically, okay, you design a chip, but chip doesn't work on its own. There is a lot of software, and there's a lot of applications and stacks that run on top of the chip, and there are other companies who do that. So you work with them, right? So there is generally you have to build an ecosystem. So if you see NVIDIA, for example, which is the most valuable company right now, you would think that the chip is actually their key thing. Not really, in my opinion. Actually, వాళ్ళు చేసిన చిప్స్ చాలా కంపెనీలు చేయగలవు, చేస్తున్నాయి. But their clear differentiator is the CUDA, their programming language, and the entire stack they built on top of it. So they do some of that work, and they have built a big ecosystem that built applications on top of that thing. So that's very important. So that's the reason that they're able to do what they're able to do today, right? That entire ecosystem is their strength, not just a chip. There are a lot of companies which can do the chips, right? Then application engineers. These are typically the engineers who actually work very closely with the customer, right? The customer wants to use your chip, and then they start the development process, they design the board, they put your chip. There are a lot of things that go into it, right? So these are application engineers are extremely important because they work very closely with the customer, and also because they work very closely, they get a lot of insights. What are the real issues with your product and competition, right? I think we have a caller. Hello.
Hello, sir. Good morning, sir.
Morning, Amma.
Sir, common mistakes committed by the engineers in marketing.
How
to overcome those mistakes, sir?
How to overcome those mistakes? Well,
mistakes.
ఓకే, ఫస్ట్ థింగ్, మీరు ఇప్పుడు నేను చెప్పింది విన్నారు, రైట్? ఇది నాకు ఎవరు చెప్పలేరు, నేను స్టార్ట్ అయినప్పుడు. సో ఫస్ట్ థింగ్, రైట్, దట్స్ రీజన్ యాక్చువల్లీ ఐఎమ్ డూయింగ్ దిస్ సెషన్, రైట్? ఇలాగ మనం స్టార్ట్ అయినప్పుడు ఫస్ట్ మనకి ఎవరైనా చెప్పేవాళ్ళు ఉంటే, నేను 25 years పనిచేశాను, ఇవి నేర్చుకున్నాను అని చెప్పేవాళ్ళు ఉంటే, అవి వినగలిగితే మనకి రైట్, దట్స్ వన్ థింగ్. So just go through my session again, right? That's one thing, right? చెప్పేవాళ్ళు ఉన్నారు. Number 2, I will say 3 things, Amma, right? I think I put that in the summary. First thing, you need to know when you move to the marketing side that you need to change your mindset a little bit and handle uncertainty. Typically మన engineering లో uncertainty అంత బాగా హ్యాండిల్ చేయలేం మనం. So you need to be ready for that, right? Marketing lo things are not as smooth, as not cut and dry, the things a little bit uncertain. So uncertainty handle cheyagala, number 1. Number 2, you should be able to present to the customers, right, and get clarity from the customers, right? As a marketing guy, your number 1 job is to translate and prioritize customer requirements to the engineers, right? So you need to keep that in mind, right? And aa chesedappudu you need to have, I think somebody asked a question, nu 10 mandi customer tho maatladao, right? And you have conflicting requirements, how do you handle it? So you need to have very clear criteria, right? Because ultimately you are making the decision for the engineers, and if you give wrong requirements, you'll get the wrong product, right? So you need to be clear on those things, right? You'll have those multiple conflicting requirements, right? You need to have clear criteria of, is it a must have or a nice to have, and how much money will I make, right? Clear criteria, right? And like I said, if the customer is not willing to pay for it, then it's not a real requirement. And the last thing I'll say is, learn to say no, right? Idi chala kashtam manaki, so but you have to learn that, right, to say no to the customer. Okay, Sairaj. Then let me finish this thing, right? Application engineering. I was talking about application engineering. These are extremely critical engineers. Actually, a lot of engineers actually take this role also. Either you can become a technical marketing engineer, application engineer, where you work very closely with the customers. When I was running the team, my AEs, application engineers, they were always the most valuable folks for me for 2 reasons. Because they work with customer on a daily basis, right? So నాకు తెలుస్తుంటాయి, right? కస్టమర్ ఇష్యూస్ ఏంటి అని, right? And number 2, I get real competitive intelligence from these guys because they work with customer, they go out for lunches with customer, they hang out with the customer, they get information on competition, right? So that's a really important role. So for a lot of engineers, actually these two are probably the 2 roles that they can really get into and learn about marketing, either a technical marketing engineer or an application engineer, right? Then other than that, business development, this is purely business development. You go talk to a lot of engineers, a lot of customers, and develop a sales pipeline, right? Then PPT, strategic marketing, right? And planning. This is sort of roadmap planning, right? So ఇప్పుడు ఈ ప్రోడక్ట్ ఉంది, నెక్స్ట్ 4-5 years కి మనకి ఏం చేయాలి అనేది, right? That's also a big exercise, right? And this is where actually, if you see big companies, this is where the problem comes, right? When you have a strong position right now, it's okay, but technology is changing so fast, right? Unless your pipeline is good, right, you can't sustain, right? Take Intel as an example, right? I mean, it had really good position over the last 25 years, but right now it's struggling because we faltered on our pipeline of things and the roadmap of things, right? Just because you're in a strong position and 19% market share doesn't mean it will be good for a long time, right? Nobody can take it for granted. Nvidia is in a good position right now, but there's so many startups doing so many things. So in the technology world, especially in the VLSI world, can't take anything for granted, right? Then the last thing, Marcom, it's marketing communication, right? This is a division marketing, and the last one I'll put is sales and marketing group, right? If you are in a sales and marketing group, then these are the typical roles, right? So you have FAE, which is same as AE, but they're in the field, right? Field application engineer or field sales engineers. These are the 2 guys who are on the field all the time, working with all the customers, right? And there is geo marketing. Typically, each geography requires a different set of marketing. Japan లో రకంగా చేస్తాము, ఇండియాలో రకంగా చేస్తాము, చైనాలో రకంగా చేస్తాము. So there's a local geographical marketing team. And again, ecosystem partners, I've talked about the biz development and biz ops, right? So these are the different roles depending on where you are, whether in the corporate marketing group or the division marketing group or the sales and marketing group, right? So I hope whoever called that person got a good idea. Okay, then lastly, I have one fun exercise. Let me go through that and we'll wrap up unless there are any questions. Again, this is a lot more fun when there is live audience. So let me do this, right? So if we can go to the PPT. Again, you can replace this to be political correct. So I have this situation. You see a gorgeous girl at a party, right? Or you can say you see a handsome guy at a party, right? Then you go up to her and say, I'm very rich, marry me. So what marketing concept is this? Okay. So I'll give the answer to this. I'll give the answers to all of them, but so that's direct marketing. Okay, you go up to her and say, I'm very rich, marry me. One of your friends goes up to her and says, pointing at you, hey, he's very rich, marry him. What marketing concept is this? That's advertising, okay? The third situation, she walks up to you and says, you're very rich, can you marry me? If anybody wants to call in, by the way, and answer these questions, guys, please do, right? Otherwise I'll keep going, right? So this is brand recognition, right? You're the brand. Then the fourth one, you go up to her and say, I'm very rich, marry me, and then she gives you a very nice hard slap on your face. What is this? That's customer feedback, guys. Customer feedback is always tough, okay? You can PPT చూపిస్తారా? Yeah. Okay, then few more things. You go up to her and say, I'm very rich, marry me, and she introduces you to her husband. So what is this one? That's demand and supply gap. Okay. You go up to her, and then before you can say anything, another person comes and tells her, I'm rich, will you marry me? And she goes with him. What would you say this is? That's competition eating into your market share. Okay. The last one, you go up to her, and before you say, I'm rich, marry me, your wife arrives. So that's restriction entering into new market. So it's just fun exercise we used to do. It will be a lot more fun if there's a live audience. But anyway, that's all I have, folks. So anybody has any questions, then you can call in. We'll wait a few minutes. Otherwise, we can wrap up. I hope this session was useful, right? Like I said, the main important reason why I'm doing this thing is because I wish somebody told me these things, had a session like this when I switched from engineering to marketing. So whatever learnings I had, I sort of distilled them into these few foils. So I hope they will be useful for you. Even if you don't, like I said, even if you don't understand everything that I told you right now, keep that in the back of your mind. And they will be relevant to you when you get into those situations, right? And you'll be able to learn faster and respond faster. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a good Saturday. Bye.